Okay, so we'll start the session now. Uh, so first of all, welcome to the ASHRAE UK's December seminar. So every month we'll be doing some seminars about building services, building energy, and all those stuffs. So this is December's event, and the title of this is Driving Sustainable Innovation Through Multidisciplinary Collaboration, the Building Engineering Perspective. So myself, I'm Joshua. I'm the chapter's president for this year. And I would like to welcome you all to ASHRAE's seminars. And you can view this. So this seminar will be recorded and will be available online on our YouTube channel. So you can head out to YouTube and you can search ASHRAE UK chapter and you can find the webinar over there and also our past webinars. And we have a HVAC exhibition in May. So we all invite you to that. So it's on May 10th at Loughborough University. So we'll be sending out an email for that as well. So just check your emails for ASHRAE UK chapters, events and activities. So today's speaker is Matt Trade. So Matt is a director at Cord Consult in Nottingham. So Matt joined the industry in 2003 after completing his BSc degree. Then he went on to do his MSc, and he was the SIBSE National Student of the Year, and he has a Passy House accreditation. Matt has worked on several of the East Midlands' most prestigious construction projects, including a carbon negative office development. So his extensive knowledge of educational building standards and ongoing work in the evolution and decarbonization of school design make him a highly valuable speaker. So I'll just hand it over to Matt to start the session.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I think having gone back through sort of my career in order to prepare this presentation, I've sort of realised how old I am and the actual length of period of time that I've been doing projects. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a trip down memory lane, if that's okay, and just go back and have a look at a few of the projects that I've done over the course of my career, particularly some of the more sustainable projects, the more innovative projects, how they worked, how the team sort of came together, what worked, and then how that fits into the rest of the industry. Quite often sustainability projects, innovation projects kind of get dispensation because everyone within the team is there with that innovation in mind, and how that then fits into the rest of construction projects is often quite different. And that's led to sort of government intervention. So we're going to have a look at a couple of milestone reports. I know it sounds boring, but actually government intervention in the construction industry is probably needed. If we're honest, we do need a little bit of a stick to come up to the party sometimes. I think the Building Safety Act demonstrates that in most recently. But yeah, the construction industry is a big sector. It's important to the UK economy. It's about 7% of GDP. So that's why the government does get involved. So it's important that they are involved and their input really does make a difference. And we'll see where some of that has worked. We'll see what's working, mainly collaboration tools, some of our experiences in that, and where we're going next, how we get there. And then we're just going to summarise it from the building service engineer's perspective and my thoughts on kind of what's worked and what's not worked and what might help in the future. So the construction industry, we all know it's a slow sector to adopt change, to innovate, and anyone that's worked in the UK construction industry can probably sympathise with this diagram. I genuinely believe it's quite reflective of how we go about things. There's quite a lot of truth in here. The architect has the vision, the engineer makes it work. And best intentions, we're all seeing it from an engineer's perspective. I see an architect sat down here, but otherwise, I've got a lot of sympathy with the second photo there. The project manager one, yeah, say no more really. The client one, I mean, they're even controlling the weather on that particular picture, aren't they? So yes, perhaps they're thinking a bit too big, but as we'll come to realise, actually the role of the client is really important, and them being a leader in collaboration is really important. And a lot of the projects that we look at, or some of the examples that I give, you can see how the client is a big factor in that. My brother's a contractor and my dad's a QS, so I can understand the last two pictures in particular. And it's, yeah, quite reflective, to be fair. So that is the world of construction that we live in. It's not as bad as that, is it? But there is a lot of truth in it. So I thought it's a good way of representing that. And I think it best played out for me. So I will go on to my career in a moment. But really where this played out was on a PFI schools project. So a schools project back in sort of 2003, 2004 that was delivered through PFI, which is where the actual contractor owns the building. So quite radically different, then rents it back to the government. And on that contract, we had, so it was Balfour Beatty I was working for at the time. We had the people that were going to run the contract as well. And I was saying to them as the construction team, if we bought a better valve for an extra or whatever it was, this would pay you back in 2 years. And even though we were all working for the same company and that valve was going to be in that building for 25 years, it just couldn't happen. And it was just the most frustrating experience. And it was all because the money wasn't released until the building was handed over to allow that mechanism to happen. We're all sat there sort of scratching our heads. So even with the best intentions, there are always barriers that are hidden away, and we're going to go through some of those. Okay, so my career as an overview. So 2003, like I say, I'm sort of realising how old I am at this point. But it was quite a different place back then. So I did a degree in mechanical engineering. So I could have gone into sort of airplanes, trains. I was always sort of interested in the kind of built environment. But to be perfectly honest, what got me into construction was a Ford Fiesta company car. Nothing more than that. It was the lure of the company car that got me in there. And I'd written it off within 6 months as well. So it wasn't a wholly successful decision, but equally, I've loved being in construction and I haven't left it since. It's been good to me, and I've been in that process for my whole career. But just put that in perspective, in 2002 was the first introduction of a U value into the building regulations. So energy efficiency beat me into construction by 1 year. But just to put that in perspective, quite radical to think that you could build a building in 2001 and there was no control over the U values. But yeah, that's how it was, and that's how far we've come from there. So I joined Balfour Kilpatrick, which is a big M&E contractor, so Balfour Beatty Engineering Services, as they're known now. Learned an awful lot on site. It was a really interesting grounding, sort of sat on a port cabin on a building site, working with the contractor, working with subcontractors, and all that kind of went through that process. And, you know, nothing against Balfour Beatty, they did look after me very, very well. And put me on a Stars of Tomorrow program, as it was called at the time. It's sort of predated X Factor and the like, but that led to me then going on to do a MSc in Building Services Engineering. So I actually started that at Balfour's. And it was really that opened my eyes up to the world of sustainability. Yes, it was new at the time. Like I say, we'd only just got U values into the regulations. So sustainability was quite a new thing. But trying then to go back into a contracting environment to design with sustainability principles was never really going to work. So in 2006, I joined ASHRAE. And then from there, I worked on lots of interesting projects, discovered lots of sort of new ideas, new ways of thinking. And ASHRAE is a great company for knowledge sharing. It's a really big global company. And at the time, a lot of the sort of 2008 Olympics were being designed. So the Beijing Olympics, the Bird's Nest Stadium, the Walk Cube, all those sort of things. So it's a great environment to learn in. And one or two of the sustainable projects that I worked on came through my time at ASHRAE. But then in 2010, I joined Couchplay Wilts, which was great for me. It was a sort of new lease of life, much more opportunities, career development, that sort of thing. And in 2015, that all kind of came true when I got to take over one of the CPW Leicester, or the Leicester office for CPW, which was really my sort of start then in sort of seeing the world slightly differently, not just as a designer anymore, but kind of that bigger picture and understanding people and HR and training and the need to put things back in again, rather than just seeing it purely from a utopia of engineering point of view, which I perhaps did up until that point, to be fair. And then, as Josh mentioned earlier, we've started our own company in 2022. And yeah, best thing that we ever did. It's great. We get to control everything now, and we can buy all the little bits of software that we always wanted without anyone saying no. So yeah, it's great, and very much enjoying life. But then one eye on the future still too. So I'm involved as a panel member on the UK Net Zero Carbon Standards, which is the regulations that will come in next year. Yeah, 2024, for embodied and operational carbon. So it's that kind of whole carbon piece. It's really interesting to be involved. I must admit, I'm more on the operational side, but you see it, all of it coming together with the embodied carbon bits of it as well. So again, that's going to be a massive opportunity for change. Talk about it at the end, but I do think that I come into the industry at the right time in terms of sustainability being new. And that's a big opportunity. It was for me as a 21-year-old back in 2003. And there's a lot of young people here, and embodied carbon will be that opportunity again, where the industry has to pivot and change. And to come into the industry at that time is a really good thing, because you will be part of that new change. And there will be people that are in the industry that don't want to change. So there's an opportunity there. Okay, let's start diving into some projects. So this was one of the more radical projects that I worked on. I mean, can you see a busier engineering house than that? I mean, we've literally stuck everything on it. But for those that don't know, the chap you can see there is an architect known as Bill Dunster. So he was the designer of the BedZ development, which is one of the kind of forefathers. You can see BedZ there next to him. So BedZ was handed over in 2002. The photo above is Bill's own house. I mean, this guy really did walk the walk. He used to turn up to the site meetings on our project up in Northampton in his car that was run on used chip fat. And he used to have to fill up the chip fat, or you hold the funnel for it. You know, he really did walk the walk. He's a really interesting guy, fantastic for knowledge sharing. And ultimately, this is what he was aiming for. He was trying to get to the point at which his company, Z Factory, had a prefabricated zero carbon house. And we kind of went through that process with him on a particular project where we built a terrace of them. So you can see there, they were what we actually built. So it was a real life project. But what was interesting about this project was that it started out as a one standard, which was known as Eco Homes at the time. And then during the design stage of the project, there was a new standard that came out called the Code for Sustainable Homes, which some of you will remember and some of you won't. But basically, it was like Briampa houses in old money. And Code 6 was the best that you could get, and it was net zero carbon. So, of course, the client, because it was an innovative project, and I was sort of making that point again about clients needing good leadership, the client, of course, wanted the badges. So that as soon as this new standard came out, it was, what do we do to meet this new standard? Which is great, really exciting as an engineer. That's why we've got everything stuck on the buildings and they look not like houses, really. But equally, from an engineer's point of view, they were fantastic. You know, the modelling, the building physics and everything else behind them were really, really interesting. But I should declare that they did sell for a loss, I'm afraid. And when I say a loss, I think we barely even recovered the actual build cost, never mind the land or the profit or any of the other things that people will want to make. Slight caveat was that the financial crisis hit halfway through, which didn't help. But yeah, these are the real world sort of situations. But what it took was a lot of collaboration, understanding and patience between us and the architect. And really, we knew the architect wanted this to work, but we were coming up against various problems. I think probably the best one for me to articulate it to engineers was actually the ventilation strategy. So a big part of BedZ is the wind cowls and that kind of look of the wind cowls on the roof. And that's quite sort of simple, you know, from an architect's point of view, Bill was obviously attached to these wind catchers. So much so, he developed his own wind catcher, which we've got on the Upton terraces up there, as part of his Z Factory product suite. Unfortunately, the fan market caught up during that design period around about 2007, with ECM fans coming in. So I had the unfortunate task of trying to tell Bill that we were better off buying a £600 MVHR unit, and it'd be more energy efficient for us than the wind catchers that kind of made the houses look how they looked. Needless to say, Bill won that argument, so we ended up with the wind catchers anyway. But it was interesting to see that switch over whereby a wind catcher with no fan in it whatsoever, but only getting 70% heat recovery, became less energy efficient than an MVHR unit with a fan in it that got sort of 96% heat recovery. So again, you know, there's sort of ideas here, and certain things work and certain things don't work. And even if physics is telling you one thing, the project might be telling you another thing. So there's a few lessons to take away from that. And this is the wider project. So it was part of a urban expansion. So it was the kind of flagship element of it. It was the centre of this big urban expansion to Northampton. It was high profile in that the clients were a combination of English partnerships, the Prince's Foundation and Northampton Borough Council. So it had a lot of attention on it, a lot of stakeholders to it. But the overall principles were that we were trying to achieve a sort of 60% carbon reduction back in 2008, which was really significant at the time. It was quite a bold statement to do. We ended up with a district heating biomass system. So I don't know if you remember, but biomass was quite popular between 2006 and 2008, simply because of the way that the Part L regulations worked at the time. And basically, if you put a biomass boiler in, because the fuel source had such a low carbon content to it, the building could really be anything. I mean, you could build sort of a cling film cube and still get away with meeting building regulations as long as it had a biomass boiler, which was kind of bonkers, but it was very low carbon. So we had a biomass boiler in the centre, which then had a district heating system, which was really innovative in this country at that time, using all sort of European products. It was really interesting to sort of see it installed. And as you can imagine, the kind of contractor comments that you get on site when they're like, and all the rest of it that you get in the UK was quite an interesting one as well. So yeah, there were lots of lessons learned, namely district heating's hard. We learn about construction details and trying to achieve super insulated properties and all the complications that came with. So with extra wide walls, there were other issues such as sort of wall ties weren't available and just really small things that made every little element of it quite difficult. But it is what it is. And just things like trying to get a vertical borehole in a back garden that's not very big. In hindsight, isn't the best idea, but we learned those lessons early on. And it was a really interesting project. But like I say, the financial crisis hit and it really kind of shackled the project. So we ended up only building one phase of it, which was a real shame. But me personally, I learned an awful lot on this project. In fact, I even used the project from my MSc dissertation. So we had micro wind, and I mean, that's how long ago it was. We still thought that putting wind turbines on houses was a good idea back then. So I did a dissertation study and was able to play like boys with toys. It was fantastic with this field with all different wind turbines, all on a trial basis. And I turn up and collect the data. None of it was on the internet, of course, so couldn't remote log in. I had to drive there, put my USB stick into the computer, download the data, take it home again just to see it. But it was fantastic. It really helped me. But it really did prove that wind turbines in urban environments, micro wind turbines, just do not work. And there was kind of no getting away from the economics of that, really, which is, you know, played out over time and you don't see them now. So, yeah, it's worked in the right direction. And, you know, bearing in mind PV panels at that time were probably 3 times as expensive as they are now, which is remarkable, really. And it's a really good thing that PV has come down in cost. Yeah, sorry, we've already touched on that one. So another project. So this was when I joined CPW. An architect who might be sat in the room worked on this project with us, Nick from CPNG. So yeah, the business case really. So Interserve is no more. I don't know what, 5 or 6 years ago turned into Tilbury Douglas, but That's still their office building. It's in North Leicester at Watermead Park. So it's really interesting. So they were in a leaky old building at the time in Servware, and they wanted to demonstrate their ability to construct sustainable buildings. So bearing in mind, you know, this was handed over in 2011, so we're probably looking at about 2009 when they conceived the idea. But again, it's the client having that vision that enabled this level of innovation to happen. So Interserve's business case, I don't know if you can see the writing up there, but basically they were spending about £23,000 a year on energy. The new office would be about £3,000 to run, just on the basic sort of PHPP analysis that I'd done. So they were going to save £20,000 a year, so good payback, etc., etc. What we actually did in the end was stick a load of PV on. You'll see on the final photo. So it got to a situation whereby the client actually had negative bills through the summer because of the feed-in tariff. I don't know if everyone remembers the feed-in tariff, but it was, when it first was introduced, it was a bit too high and it quickly got reduced. But there was a window of opportunity there that Interserve took, whereby we covered the roof with PV, like I say, had negative bills at some time. It was quite remarkable, really. And obviously, they were really proud of that. They were able to sell that as a benefit and to demonstrate their ability. But like I say, it was really down to the client being pushing for Passive House certification, which was great. So when I turned up with my PHPP, the first issue that we encountered was their existing IT policy. So they sounds so mundane, doesn't it? You try to do all this innovation, and the biggest barrier was the fact that when you went around their existing office, each individual person had their own printer. So that had, obviously, forget the kind of printer cartridge side of it, just the energy consumption, we could not get Passive House certification with their print strategy. So the point of this story is that having innovation, having that appetite from the client allows you to step outside of your normal boundaries of what you're able to control as a designer. So we were able to go and sit down with the IT guy who was like, oh, you look too different, in the usual kind of approach to things. But of course, with the client's goodwill, we were able to convince them that that wasn't the way forward. Let's have a central printer, one at each floor level, and everything worked a treat. So one of the other things I want to mention, the chap in the middle here, he was the site manager for the project, a chap called Ian Burley. I mean, he chain smoked and he swore a lot, but he was fantastic. He really was. I think you remember him, Nick. His willingness to make this project work was outstanding. And bearing in mind, he was working with tradespeople that, you know, I mean, air tightness wasn't even a phrase sort of back to most tradespeople in 2010, 11. And this guy was going around, and anyone that drilled through his air tightness layer, and that's it, all of his work's gone out the window, or leaked out the hole. So bless him, he went round, and I've never seen anyone like own a project as much as Ian earned this project. So when he got his air tightness certificate, he was quite pleased about it. So I just wanted to put that in there because it takes that leadership again. If you want innovation, it takes leadership, and Ian gave the project that leadership. He really, really did. Other things I just want to mention, the earth tube system. So we, as part of the M&E systems, on the incoming air supply, and we'll look at the whole nother story around the air supply. But what this does is brings the fresh air into the building, onto the air handling unit, via a series of earth tubes beneath the car parks. You can't see it here, but behind the building on that picture is this system below the car park. So the fresh air can come in, go under the car park. So in summer, it cools it down, and in winter, it heats it up and just takes that chunk of edge off it in either direction. And again, so we were quite cautious about this. You tend to be, as a designer, over cautious, and the manufacturers were claiming sort of an 8-degree rise. And in reality, I think we designed in 6, and in reality, it was delivering more like a 10-degree rise. So it would be 32 outside, and you could get 22 coming into the building, which is really remarkable. It was actually a really good system, albeit it was quite expensive again. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of highlight that project had sort of really interesting kind of innovation side to it, and a very much a willing client that made it work. One thing I do want to just mention is that, if anything, we found that on this project we'd actually overglazed it on the south facade, but I've included this photo just because the blinds are closed, but we had motorised blinds on the southern elevation, which from an engineer's point of view was amazing because you're basically controlling the sun. So each one of these windows become a radiator in effect. So each window we introduced on the south facade brought heat into the building over the course of the year. It was actually a radiator. So obviously the big implication of that is when the sun's shining, you don't want it to, what do you do then? So hence the motorized blinds were fantastic. It was such a good solution, but again, it was a really expensive solution. But the process of learning when the blinds go up and when the heating comes on was a really kind of interesting learning experience. And it took many attempts to get that right, whereby because we want the sun to be heating the building up, when the building drops below temperature, we want the blinds to open. And it's how long do you allow before the heating kicks in, because people are going to be complaining about the cold. So there's all those kind of like little teething issues that took an awful long time for us to work out. And the users took quite a long time to work it out as well. So in summer, you feel like you're warm, maybe the sun's coming in through the window before the blinds reacted. First thing they would do is open the window. But of course, that's just going to bring in the cold 32-degree air rather than the 22-degree air that's coming out the air tube system. So there was an awful lot of kind of learning how to do it. And there was even sort of, then you'd get a M&E manager come in and just turn everything into manual, and everything would all of a sudden the building wouldn't be working properly, and lots of issues. But there was a willingness there to make the whole thing work, which was great. Now, it's a bit embarrassing Nick sat here now, but one of the things that I really noticed about this project was, as a building services engineer, you don't always get to kind of dictate, certainly back in the early kind of, mid-noughties years, dictate where plant rooms went and that sort of thing. But this project, because it was Passive House certified, we were able to, we asked for things and we got them. It was quite remarkable. So one of the best things that we had, and really simple, but just the floor plan made it work, was using the server room as the return air tank. So the ground floor plan's the one on the left there. The kind of mid-central point is the server room in the middle of the two meeting rooms, which is, you can see here. And what that did was give us a return air path for all the air to come back from the main central office, but of course pick up the beneficial heat from the server room before it goes back onto the air handling unit to have that heat recovered to put back into the occupied spaces of the building. So it's a really simple engineering idea, but you never get your way on things like that. But on a Passive House project, all of a sudden you start to get these sort of things put into place, and yeah, lo and behold, the floor plans came through. There it is, exactly where we asked for it, and everything worked a treat. At the other end of the scale, when we designed this building, obviously it was early on in the process of Passive House, so there weren't many Passive House certified products at the time. And in fact, we designed the building originally around having 4 separate sort of really residential sized MVHR units to heat the building. To ventilate and to heat the building. And then 2 weeks before we went to tender, so 2 weeks before the kind of sending out the contract documents, everything's finished, here we are, a new product became available. There was, all of a sudden, there was a certified air handling unit. So you can imagine as a mechanical engineer, it's like, wow. So we were on the internet looking at that. Unfortunately, it was an Austrian product, and all of the supporting documents were written in German. There was no UK stockist. So you can imagine when the contractor comes on board and I've specified this Austrian handling unit, they've got to drive there and pick it up, drive it back. Yeah, there were a couple of tricky conversations in that process, but it was the right thing for the project and we were able to make it work. So understanding architect allowed us to have the air handling unit. So we swapped it round, put it in beneath the meeting room on the far end there, which is what you can see. So we've got that central air handling unit with the air tube system feeding onto it. So we could either bypass the air tube system and take the fresh air from that, sort of see on the lever at the top there, and then supply into the building and pull it all back free. But it's far more sensible to have 1 air handling unit than 4. So even though it caused a right kerfuffle 2 weeks before tender, which no one wants, It was the right thing to do, and it's just the nature of innovation. It's the nature of when that product became available to the market, and it's always going to be a moving market. And in innovation, that's always going to happen. And it's just something that the team's got to get on board with and make work. But it did. Everyone was on board with it. You know, even the contractor that was driving over, you know, they understood what the situation was, and they went and drove over and picked it up. So it does go to show that it can work. Just a few other minor bits on this project, because I did love it to bits. Air tightness was a really interesting one in terms of collaboration, and we learned an awful lot there. So, for example, we had at one point the disc board, albeit the ground floor one, but in this fabric outside of the air tightness line, which is the red line here, which of course means so distribution board is in the electrical distribution board. What that meant was that we had sort of 16 incoming cables from that distribution board going through that air tightness line. Whilst if we moved the distribution board, it actually ended up in this store here, we had one cable going through that air tightness line. So there's loads of kind of just common sense stuff in innovation that we hadn't thought of, but yeah, tightness consultant was able to bring us on board. Everyone was sort of accepting to the change, and we changed these things. Where we had the odd radiator dotted around, we put them on internal walls rather than external walls. It's just common sense stuff, but you don't really think about it on a normal construction project until innovation makes you think about it. Yeah, sorry, the product in the middle, again, was a real innovation project. So this was a product called Durasol. Say it slowly so I don't say Duracell. But Durasol block. So it was a wood fibre block that basically had one half of it was insulation, and the other half of it was open formwork to pour concrete into. So it had everything. Again, from a mechanical engineer's point of view, I wanted the thermal mass on the inside, the concrete, but it had this great insulation on the outside. It was then sourced in terms of materials. You know, it's not cement. Well, it's cement bonding, but it's in comparison to a traditional block, using wood fibre, it was fantastic. But of course, we probably fell for the sales pitch a little bit. But the promise I can remember to the contractor was that they'd be able to lay 5 horses of blocks at once and pour the concrete. I can still remember the guy saying it. And I can remember being there when they had 2 with concrete and it burst out. So again, yeah, it's part of the problem with innovation. And when we're actually then trying to source where the material came from, it was like basically anywhere in Canada, those wood might have come from, you know what I mean? There was so many kind of knock-on effects. But it was a great project and it got an awful lot of awards and certainly benefited my career from the back of it. So yeah, grateful to have been involved. But I think the main thing to take from that again is that innovation does take a bit of patience and across the design team. Okay, so this is then another kind of leading sustainability project. This was for the University of Bradford. I'm allowed to say that. And it was a demonstration project. So it was a STEM lab aimed at getting sort of sixth form students into STEM as a demonstration. So as I say, the client wanted everything on it. They wanted Passive House, which was I was a Passive House certified designer. That's kind of my specialism. BREEAM, I wasn't the BREEAM assessor, but it was BREEAM Outstanding at the time, and then AECB Gold at the time. So they just wanted everything to demonstrate how sustainable they were as a university. And it was interesting. It was a really interesting project to work on. So for those of you who don't know Passive House, really what you're trying to do with Passive House is use south-facing glazing to heat the building. Now, unfortunately, this building was completely in shade. You can see the sort of closeness to the building. So again, the kind of site wasn't ideal for it in that respect. Obviously, it was in Bradford, so it had a really cold weather file. And of course, like I said in the previous thing with the Interserve office, quite a lot of the things with Passive House, especially a non-domestic Passive House, is the amount of equipment that goes into them in comparison to a house. And there's no sort of dispensation there. So you can imagine with a lab, that wasn't easy either. But despite the single story nature of it, because it was only a small building, so it was always going to have a poor form factor. So the energy efficiency, heat loss kind of elements to it. We made it work. there was a willingness there from all parties, whether it was the architect, whether it was the client, whether it was the BREEAM assessor, and then myself as the passive house assessor, and just trying to find solutions that made it work. And we did make it work. It helped because it was a little bit further down the line. So for the sort of eagle-eyed mechanical engineers, now we're getting Swegon air handling units, which is a bit more of a traditional product with a UK installation manual, you know, like just basics like that. So we're moving away from the kind of wacky stages of 2011 in terms of passive house compliance. But again, it wasn't easy, but with that willingness to all work together, we got there in the end and we got the certification. This then it's the same project. The contractor was looking at ways to allow us to have flexibility. I say, sorry, sort of mechanical and electrical flexibility. So it was a lab project. So if over the fullness of time, the use of the building would probably change, especially because it was only really to demonstrate to sixth form students. So we actually designed in a sacrificial layer for our servicing. So again, we have the sacrificial zone well away from the air tightness. So it's like the air tightness line there, and we've got a sacrificial zone for running cabling, that sort of thing. So if anyone wanted to move a socket in the future, they could do. And what offside manufacturer then gave us was a really controlled process. So this was one of the first times I'd actually seen offside or sandwich panel manufacturing, or whatever you want to call it. And it was really impressive, really, really impressive. And like I say, the site was really tight. So it enabled the contractor then to come in and build it really, really quickly in a controlled way without all of the stresses that Ian had on site with air tightness. So it's really, and I remember sort of telling them about Ian and air tightness, and this is what they came up with as a solution, which is really good. So yeah, this was back in sort of 2012. We were going around and looking at these. So it kind of a forefather project to what we see now in terms of modern methods of construction coming through on lots of different requirements. One of the other big benefits, of course, apart from the normal prefabricated benefits, was that it was able to also design out thermal bridges, because we were able to have layers of timber, we were able to offset and get down to the passive house levels of thermal bridges, which is, you know, quite difficult, quite a controlled way of doing it. But again, it was a really thick wall. I think that ended up at about 355 mil by the time you're done, whereas, you know, normally you'd expect perhaps 175 at that point in time. Okay, so then just moving on to my experience sort of in education and how that then has sort of progressed through on collaboration. So we're starting to get back into the real world a bit here. This is public sector work. So I mentioned before, I started my career with Balfour's on the education side, and I've always seen that public sector education delivery. And whilst it doesn't sound like an exciting sector, it's had a lot of money put into it over the years. So a lot of government spend goes through education. And when the government spends money, they have to demonstrate that they're being a best practice client and doing it in the right way. So they're always pushing the boundaries through it. So DFE procurement, whilst, yeah, the PFI experience wasn't great. I can remember even seeing a Channel 4 dispatches about PFI when I was working on one at the time. But the DFE procurement processes push lots of boundaries for the industry, whether that's overheating. So a lot of the overheating regulations now have come out of the school regulations, started with BB 101, TN52's then come in, which has gone back into BB 101. But schools have a lot of that. Climate-based daylight modelling all came from the school process and just getting away from that blinds down, lights on kind of approach to things. And then you can see since then, we've had further changes. So 2013 was when we had the coalition government in place. We had priority schools building programme, but it was the start of the off-site kind of modern methods of construction. And we've got some photos on the next slide about one of the ones that's been delivered on that. But the point being here is that the whole supply chain has an impact here when we're trying to achieve things in the kind of real world. So the DFE procurement works on the basis that a contractor leads it. So we work for Bowman Kirtland. The client contact actually used to work for another contractor as well. But what that takes with them is their entire supply chain. And there's a trust process there where we all keep, as long as we're doing a good job, of course, we all get more work the following on the next project by doing a good project on the previous project. And Bowman Kirtland have been, and Nick will stand to this as well, have been really loyal in terms of if we've done them right, we don't do a bad job, we're honest with them, they will reward that kind of process. And what that's done over that period of time is created an environment of trust. And it's really refreshing to work on those projects as opposed to kind of traditional construction projects where perhaps that partnering and trust isn't there in the same way. So this is one of the MMC projects that they've worked on. So I think this is Thames Parking Manufacturer, but again, it just goes to show how far things have gone. What used to be really innovative is now becoming part of public sector schools, kind of bread and butter, the norm, if you like. So yeah, this is one of the schools with brick slips, but you can put whatever you want on the outside. It's that process of controlling the manufacturer, controlling the waste, controlling safety, and then speeding it up on site, you know, saving in prelims and everything else. And that was actually a project, a factory down in Coventry that we went to visit on that occasion. And if you ever get the opportunity to go, I'd really encourage it. You know, walking around any factory is good fun, isn't it? To be fair. So then where did all that lead to? So lots of DFE school projects. And then because Bowman Kirtland had done a good job, we got asked to do some pilot projects with them, or the DFE asked Bowman Kirtland to do some pilot projects, of which we worked on 2. So Maritime Academy again is one with Nick, with CPNG Architects. But it really was about pushing the boundaries and trying to investigate. So the DFE, to be fair to them, again, a good client, I think they put an extra 25% funding into 3 school projects, of which then we worked on 2. And really, they were a precursor to what's known as the S21 framework. So anyone that doesn't work in schools, that's the kind of new framework now that deals with net zero carbon in operation. So not yet embodied carbon, but kind of everything that goes before it. And again, has pushed lots of boundaries, whether it's cross ventilation, daylighting, indoor air quality, lots of the exemplar kind of standards bear out of that DFE program. But unfortunately for these 2 projects that we worked on, I mean, I don't think Maritime's even been built yet for archaeological reasons, has it? So they bought a site, unfortunately, that delayed the process. So it didn't get built in time to actually feed into the process. So even with the best intentions, unfortunately, the DFE spent the money, but we weren't able to get the projects built in time to learn from them, to put that back into the framework. So we're now all designing to the S21 framework. And again, you know, they did everything right, but it just didn't quite work out in terms of capturing that knowledge in time. But it's not to say that it's going to be forgotten, but it's just another lesson there. But really interesting projects to work on. Trying to get some of the nitty-gritty. So this is trying to cross-ventilate internally landlocked. Quite tricky, to be honest with you. And I mean, we ended up with a labyrinth below the slab, which is kind of a bit of a take on the earth tube system. But anyway, we're not here to talk about passive cooling necessarily, but just the process of the client trying to do something good again. But the program probably tripping us up a little bit. And one of the other things that sort of came out of this as well is you end up getting sucked into a mindset of sustainability when you're on these projects. And when we come to have the discussion about not having gas, because you wouldn't want gas in a building like this, would you? But of course, the Bunsen burners. And I can remember the conversation and just straight to the head of the science curriculum in the UK for the DFE and just thought, well, this will be a breeze. You know what I mean? This would be easy for me to convince her that you can't have gas in a building and claim it's 0 carbon. But needless to say, we lost the argument. And yeah, it's hard to say that curriculum shouldn't be sideswiped by sustainability. But anyway, make your own judgment on it. But just wanted to highlight that there are reasons, again, that kind of sustainability doesn't always win out, and the function of the building has got to be considered. That's what it's there for. That's what the money has been spent for. So yeah, just another dose of reality, I think. But there was lots that we took from this. And one of the main things, not that it was enjoyable to work on, to be honest, but the metering process. So we put together a guide to understand metering and how to measure energy consumption. I mean, it doesn't sound innovative, does it? But the amount of buildings we went back to and couldn't compare like for like because the meters weren't named properly. or they've been, you know, we'd signed them off, to be fair. But things like zone 1 for lighting, you know, where is zone 1? It's just useless in hindsight. So just common sense naming of metering and things like that. And a lot of that kind of common sense stuff came out with trying to be really innovative, a little bit like the Interserve project, where just put the dishboard inside the thermal line. Such a simple change, but it takes innovation for some reason for you to think of the simple things. Okay, so where are we within the current industry? Sorry, just sort of conscious of time, I'll try and speed up a bit. But there were a few big reports done that made a real big difference. First of all, there was the Latham report back in 1994. And what this focused on was that the UK construction industry was failing at that time, oddly still is now. But it did a review and focused on 3 things. And that was the relationship between the client and the contractor being better. So when we go back to the kind of meme joke at the start and just trying to think of the differences between those pictures, the nature of the contract, so the way the contract's set up. So things like quality rather than just best price and some of the processes that are in there. And then, of course, the role of the public sector. Now, in fairness, so these are the kind of client public sector elements of it, and we'll come on to the contract ones. When you go through these, quite a lot has been done, but it's still not necessarily working. So it's hard to argue that the Department for Education certainly has been a best practice client. A lot of government projects are best practice clients. They introduce the standards before anyone else, and the rest of the industry catches up. So yes, not quite all of them have been done, but some of them have been addressed. And there were issues that existed back in 1994. Again, on the contract related stuff, quite a lot of these things are now implemented, certainly design responsibility checklists. I get that on every single project. Most of us go, oh no, I'm gonna have to go through the design responsibility. You know, it's a negative, but actually it's what we need to make everything work better. I think the one about having more combined, clearer information responsibilities and sharing that information is really important. But one of the biggest things that kind of came out of all of this, it's got nothing to do with sustainability or innovation, was actually adjudication, so the payment process. But anyway, we're not here to talk about that. Then in 1998, so when Google was invented, this is that long ago, there was the Egan report, which again put out kind of 5 key changes. So committed leadership, and we've seen a lot of that. A focus on the customer, which is a bit of an innovation for the construction sector, because up to now, we focus on what we want to do as our own individual elements of those pictures. We focus on what we want, and no one's actually flipped it back round like the car industry to the consumer, i.e. the client, and understanding what the client wants and what they need. So integrated processes and teams are really interesting ones. So I've got a couple of slides on kind of the BIM process, where we've got to with that and where we'll go next. Quality-driven agenda, so again, not just about price, and as I say, a commitment to people, which I see more and more now. We have an industry shortage of skills, and owning a business and understanding that really starts to sort of sharpen your mind to the commitment to people side of this. So in 2020, there was another review done. Really, it was the kind of climate emergency that, for me, changed things. So when the declaration of climate emergency happened, that was the big step change. So, you know, I've been looking at this sustainability kind of agenda for 20 years and waiting for it to get into the mainstream. And it was only really when Greta Thunberg got involved that anything actually significantly changed. And then all of a sudden, you saw clients changing. So CSR targets came in. Consumer demands change. So we want the consumers actually demanding it of them. So we're getting those smarter clients. So as we call it here, total cost ownership, TCO. So the client's starting to look at the whole life cycle rather than just the price that they're paying for things. And from a mechanical engineer's point of view, the best example of that is digital twins. And now as we're seeing that come through, so clients taking the risk out of it, I think that's a really exciting side of where we'll go. As I mentioned, skill shortage, that's still an issue. Second one down, it's still definitely an issue. Brexit hasn't helped. We need to do more training in this country, and the problem is only getting worse. I don't think that we've met that one at all. In terms of industrialisation, it's definitely happening. like I say, the example projects of off-site manufacturers really helping improving the quality. New materials. So in terms of new materials, there's lots of different changing items. So whether embodied carbon coming in next year. So you see changes in the lighting industry, for example, where we're getting paper light fittings. You know what I mean? If I tried to introduce that on a building site at Belfast 20 years ago, you can imagine the reaction. But it's great to see that the products are changing like that. Even offering lighting as a service now, so you can buy a light fitting and rather than paying for the light fitting, you pay for the light that comes out of it. And what a clever idea that is. So that there's the responsibility for someone to come and reuse the parts again. So it's like going back in time to when I first started. In a school, you'd have someone with a tube, with a box of fluorescent tubes that were like spares to put in place. And that was a far more sustainable way of going about maintenance than LED fittings. But energy efficiency has taken us down the LED fitting route, which hasn't helped the embodied carbon circular economy element of it. So it's still changing. There are new materials, and there's definitely an appetite for the market to catch up with the demand there. So the market will respond when we need them, albeit sometimes very late to the tender deadlines. And yeah, BIM's a game changer. I think we all know that. We've seen significant changes in that, and it's doing a lot in terms of helping coordination and having that information at the right time. New entrants to the construction industry, I must say, I sort of see this slightly the other way around, in that the big barrier to BIM is the expense. So the Autodesk license is expensive. It's sort of £3,500 a user, which to a small company that hasn't got that built into their overhead at the moment, that's a massive leap. Now, I'm quite fortunate. I've worked at big companies, so it's never really been an issue, but you can see how that would be a barrier to some companies, just the cost. So therefore, business could be slow adapters and slow to get up to speed on it. But the updated safety, sustainability and code regulations, so we've got the Building Safety Act coming in. And like I say, I do think that's an opportunity for young people to make the most of. So just conscious of time, I'm going to skip over some of this elements, but this is when BIM was then introduced to the UK back in 2011. So we were used to doing things in CAD, and all of a sudden we could step into a 3D world. It felt great, but frustrating at the same time. There were lots of teething issues. I remember I was at ASHRAE at the time, so ASHRAE made a decision in 2008 to adopt BIM. But ASHRAE was kind of a structural engineering company. It is multidisciplinary, but it's really a structural engineering company. And the structural engineers were ready. But my God, the M&E engineers were not ready. We had an absolute nightmare. We had no families. There was nowhere to go and get family. It was just carnage. Like no jobs went out for about 6 weeks. It was just, what are we doing? But again, you know, there was the appetite there within ASHRAE to have that strong leadership say, we are doing this. So we had to crash back up again, was basically it. But yeah, so the government started to put into process the BIM side of things back in 2011. So they were looking at that, trying to improve the coordination. Now we're up to the point of which we've got the global solution, which is great. So the ISO has now been issued, which is a combination between sort of UK and US. Yeah, it's going to be drivers forward. It's giving us everything that we need. And it's amazing sort of going through this process, how much relate back to the kind of day-to-day stuff that's in your inbox, whether it's capability assessment, whatever it is, that kind of come out of this standard. So again, the timeline of this, just to very, very, very quickly point out. Where we had the low carbon consumption report. So before that, you know, there was very little in terms of low carbon. BIM only kind of came in at that point, and we're only up to the international standard here. So an awful lot has happened in a very, very narrow period of time. And we all know, or perhaps we don't, but the kind of next slide shows it is, this is the coming together of the various standards. So we had PAS 1192 back in, I think it was the late 90s, it was, or even early 90s it was first introduced, but that's evolved. It evolved to when BIM kind of came out in sort of 2007, 2008 time. But now that's formed the basis for the international standard that we'll all come to love as the Bible. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but this is the bit to me, albeit it looks like a really kind of building services engineers diagram, but this is the bit that's starting to focus on clients. So organizational information requirements is what the client needs. So whether that's, it might be for financial reporting at the end of the year, it might be for an accreditation to get an ISO, it might be lots of different things, but it's focusing on the consumer, which is really interesting. It's like the shift change that we've all needed. The bottom three elements then are the kind of project-based stuff, where it all then feeds back into the top right, which is then the client's asset that they have for the operation of their building. So as we all know, the kind of main element of a building project is actually the operational phase. So you can see there where we pick it up through the project phase and then pass it back to the client for that operational bit. Conscious of time, we'll skip over that one. So this is then where we're seeing this come through on our projects. So we now have the client, the Department for Education, putting out the EIRs. So that's their version of what they think they need at project level to deliver their business needs. So we receive that DEIR, or Bowman Kirtland do. Bowman Kirtland, then, they are really good, to be fair to them. They produce a BIM execution plan much earlier than most contractors have. And it's quite mature now. It's, you know, I can remember sitting down in the first class detection meeting. I mean, it could have gone on for days. We were looking at every class, you know, like no one was thinking about acceptable clashes or tolerances or anything like that. We were literally clicking through each one going, oh, yeah, I'll be all right. You know, it was as simple as that. But the process has become much more refined now. We've all learned efficiencies, but it does again, you know, that process become refined because we're almost in a partner in a relationship because Bowman Kirtland are keeping that team together as a long-term thing. So we gain that trust. Some of the other benefits very, very quickly, speed of change. So BIM now, or Revit, has allowed us to update our drawings from a new architectural model in, I mean, hours in some cases, whilst we used to sort of ask for 2 weeks of frozen drawings to draw all the polylines around all of the CAD layers. You know, 2 days is comfortable now, really is as a shift change, just so you sort of understanding some of the changes that's happened in that process. So where will we go next? So as I say, BIM level 3 can only help. It's going to help that integration. We've already seen the benefit of BIM level 2 in terms of sharing models more often, understanding where structures have got beams, FF&E and all the rest of it. BIM level 3 can only help that process. The AI element of BIM level 3, so already on the schools, we're collecting a lot of data. Now we know what the meters are telling us, that we can actually use for machine learning to predict patterns and identify problem cases and use all of that kind of big data lake for feeding back into the process and make the buildings better. The government put out, bottom left, their paper to get us to level 3. I think it was 2015 on the timeline. And this little diagram here is just really trying to show the different levels. So how the Internet of Things comes into that process, how we can learn from the other sectors. But what's key is the clients at the top. So it's a consumer-led industry now that we're trying to create and trying to pivot that back round. And like I say, things like the digital twin are really going to help us that process. So difference being traditionally we would have done a simulation, so there would always be that IES model sat there. And it's just that once the building's handed over, it just sit on our server and that'd be the end of it. What this is about is now taking that model and using that model for the client to predict their carbon emissions in the future or whatever it might be, changes to their business. There's the technology side of things. So put the top there about augmented reality. And I've tried to get this on projects so many times. So we've got a BIM model, we've got a phone. We've got the technology, why can't we make all this happen on site? And it's just simple things like licenses. So, you know, each party has to have a license to use it. So we buy the license because it's in our best interest, but the contractor who's getting our snag list, he's not going to spend 800 quid on making our lives easiest to tell him what they've done wrong. So, yeah, again, it would take a client to say, now is everyone's using this system, build £800 into your fee proposals. It's simple as that. So again, it just shows that a lot of this has got to come from top down rather than bottom up. And then energy prices going up. It's not a popular thing to say, but it really helps building service engineers. So payback period's half if energy prices double. Energy has always been too cheap. That's the one thing I've always took from my career, that payback periods are too cheap because energy is too cheap relative to the capital cost. So yes, energy prices going up isn't a good thing for it, and there's lots of kind of negatives, but it does help the kind of sustainability and energy efficiency case. So how do we see that from a building engineer's perspective? So I think one of the main things is it's changed a lot in the last 20 years. I can remember when at my first job, like the guy I was learning off said, oh, didn't even get to speak to the architect. So basically back in those days, the architect would design the building, and then it would go through the series of designers, but you were never allowed to communicate back up as, why don't we do this? Why don't we coordinate that? And you think where that's gone to me getting my server room right in the middle of the plan in 2011. It's quite a significant change. So it's about sort of leaning into that change and trying to benefit from it. 2003 was a great time to get into the industry. Like I said, it was that significant change in terms of sustainability, and I think we've got another one coming. But really, it was only the climate emergency that made that difference. So, last 5 years, something like that. Innovation needs patience. I sort of must have said that 10 times going through there. But if you haven't got the appetite for it, don't be in that leading pack. Because if you do try and be a trailblazer, you will have to deal with these issues. And if you're not comfortable with that and your client's not comfortable with that, and I can remember certainly at ASHRAE, we took some clients out of their comfort zone in that respect. It's best to be in the pack behind the trailblazers. But yeah, judge it on your own clients. Long-term relationships build trust. So ASHRAE had a relationship with Dunsters. That's what really made BedZ and Upton work. So Nick sat here, so it's a bit embarrassing to say, but yeah, we've got a really good relationship with CPMG. That's a long-term relationship. It's not a one-off project relationship. And one thing I do notice that's a benefit of the East Midlands is that Nottingham is a city whereby you work with people again. It's not a city where you get lost. And that actually helps stuff like this. It helps build relationships. You know people, you trust people. So yeah, I think there's a benefit there that the East Midlands has got. The Bowman Kirkland experience of being loyal to your sort of supply chain, and they really genuinely are. It's not just as designers, all the way through to the manufacturers. If someone does them a good job, they make sure they get the reward back again. And that's really created an environment, and a couple of our guys in the room would testament to that it's not like a normal relationship with a contractor. Everything's open, and because no one's going to sue anyone. It's the blunt element of it, because there's that trust there. There's the next project there, so it's in everyone's best interest to get this one right, learn the lessons, because we'll win more projects. So total cost ownership, so clients, whole life costing. So as I mentioned before, simple payback periods are just try and avoid it. Total cost ownership is what will allow us that change, and clients seeing the operational side, that other 75% of what's going on, is really important, and educating them on that side of it. And that really a big part of Passive House is about that process and about educating the client. But there are still problems. So I think one of the best examples was with Bowman Kirkland, we wanted to get the whole Revit model converted into an IS model, right? Because it's been promised for years and years and years. We went through our maritime, and it turns out it's still not there. And one of the reasons is that we want an energy model built in a certain way, and an architect wants a model built in another way, because they're not trying to measure energy. They're trying to demonstrate their design and everything that goes with that. So there's still teething issues in here. There's still that patience, and there's still problems yet to solve. So it's not all done yet, is the point. But the feedback loop must challenge the business as usual. The one thing I've sort of taken away from all of this is that kind of, and we've had it recently on projects where you get the guy going, oh, I've been doing this for 30 years. Who are you coming and telling me? But if we carry on doing what we've done for the last 30 years, we're going to end up with the same product that we had for the last 30 years. So at some point, that has got to change. I think that's me done. So apologise for overrunning there. Has anyone got any questions?
Yeah, I have one. So you said that the sustainability was started kicking like in 2003, and then people started working on net zero. Now the net zero carbon is coming up where you are going to measure embodied carbon in buildings, but also building services and all other things. So are the clients willing to take that step, take that initiative to encourage the people, like let's say the architects or the construction management people or the building service engineers, their projects to implement it in their projects? Or like, is there some other steps that we need to take in order to pressurize the client?
I think there will always be early adopters and the late kind of comers, but I would say, and other people in the room's opinion on it, but no, I think is the answer. I think the general sort of commercial developer, this doesn't really matter that much. And for their point of view, they're trying to please their investors, and their investors want certainty. So if you change things, that's creating risk that they don't want in there. So you can see how it doesn't get into there. So they need someone else, like a good best practice client, which is really where the public sector plays their part, to go through that process, break the eggs, understand where it all goes wrong, and then they kind of come in later on and add it in. So, for example, PV panels. PV panels weren't on commercial developments sort of 10 years, and it probably wouldn't be now if they didn't have to, but it's become economically viable, or planning has forced them to put it on, so you end up with a bit on there. But they're not going to do anything unless they really have to. It's my own cynical kind of opinion. It's a bit like the Building Safety Act. I mean, it does need a bit of stick. It needs someone to actually be, it sounds awful, doesn't it? But it needs a policing process. Otherwise, I don't think the industry will actually change. The public sector bit will, because they're obliged to. The clients who've got CSR responsibility, whether like universities are a great example of that. But the brands that don't have consumers demanding that, to say it better. And I think we're still a little while off everyone catching up, which is why we need the regulation. Yes.
Well, thousands of involved directly with it. It's important to get involved in some of the big tenders out there, given the fact that the quality readiness level is. We, for example, we now mentioned we work with staff. For example, we work with a company that pumps CO2 back into carbon. So how can we say it's with some of the big tenders? Improvements in the market?
Yeah, I think there's a natural contradiction there, simply because there's a lot of this has been about partnering and creating those long-term relationships. So how you then get new relationships into that without getting stuck behind, giving 3 examples of previous projects that you can't have done because you're a new startup. And I think that is it's a barrier. And I think it's difficult. And it's only really when there's a reason to change, like an innovation type project, that you'll get that opportunity on the larger major projects. But I think what it takes to take change is understanding the value. So it's for, digital twins is a great example for us now. And it's about how do we demonstrate to a client the value that can bring. And we need a couple of examples. Again, it's the chicken and egg in order to get to that point. But we need to be informing clients of what those benefits are in the kind of traditional world. In the innovation elements of it, you will always get those opportunities, and it's perhaps those that give the breakthrough to those kind of really innovative products or processes. I do think there's quite a few barriers, if I'm honest.
Right off almost the very start at the beginning, if they're not directly working with myself, most of the guys that are there. It's like what you said, 30 years in the industry now, I mean, that's not really it. Going and doing the way you do it,
It's a big problem. Yeah.
But say talking to somebody who was designing a commercial building. In your experience, what would be the top 3 to 5 tips from an engineer?
Understanding the client is definitely the number one. So getting to know a client's business is where then you can start to add value. So when you're sat in a design team meeting, don't switch off and wait for the M&E bit. Listen to what's going on and try and engage with where you can benefit, where we can bring meter in, where there's so many kind of bits that we touch as M&E engineers that can influence everything else. So I think understanding a client is the first one, then not switching off when you're in the meetings or in the discussions or assume someone else is talking about it. Get involved, be involved in it. Yeah, it is a big one. How many was I asked to give? Sorry. 3. What would be the third one? I think understanding the brief again. So certainly from a business operator's point of view, not doing things twice is, or if we're doing it twice for innovation purposes, that's slightly different because it's kind of a research process, but making sure that we understand what the client wants, ask the right questions before we get diving in and making assumptions. And so, yeah, I think challenging that brief process. And then once you understand what it is that it needs and you understand what the client needs and where it fits within the rest of the design team, you can be confident in what you're doing, that you're designing the right way and you're designing the right solution for that. And everyone's different. Every client's different.
The kind of line described up here.
Okay. Personally, what do you think? Biggest business opportunities coming up in 2024 for contractors and also for investors?
Circular economy. That shift to a circular way of thinking is going to rip up lots of what we've done before, which is exciting to me. You know, I like the change. And I'll just reiterate that point again, that's a huge opportunity for anyone coming into the industry at this point in time. This is a big shift change that's going to happen in the next few years. And yeah, starting to think in that circular way is I think the LED lighting thing is one of the best examples of that, where we've gone down that route because it was energy efficient. LED lighting, it's all encapsulated in that module, but you can't have components, you can't replace individual components. So it's not the right solution for circular economy. But today, right now, for the regulation that's in right now, it's the perfect solution. So I think, yeah, that's a good example of how things will change.
Can you all just do math technique? Picture and then where can be three from around.
Sorry, quick one. How do you stay in touch? What would be the best?
Yeah.
LinkedIn or?
Yeah, LinkedIn by all means.
Yeah. What was your name?
Matt.
So George from one of our new business center, try to
WRET. Take care, but thanks for coming down, mate. That's it. Do you want to type it in? All right, got a thingy on my phone. Just put my phone in my bag.
Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant. Yeah, we're connected. Yeah, nice.
So we're working with startups in your domain. So one of the challenges is how do we sort of
get them in some of the big tenders. For example, the company that pumps CO2 back into concrete, we work with a air purifying sort of manufacturer. Similar to your lightning case, we charge by the hour for healthy air for cleaning.
Well, okay.
So
So it's either within the DM. Yeah.
everything's traditional there, so it's hard to.
But it's whilst it's a problem, the new style is probably what's needed for the partnership. You know what I mean? So you can see all these contradictions. But my dad's got a little QS practice, and he always bemoans the fact that, oh, how am I supposed to get a £10 million example secondary school for if you won't let me?
Yeah. Well, nice to meet again. Let's catch up.
Yeah.
All right.
If you want to quickly gather those meetings with any picture.
What's the start off with?
Can we take a photo first?
It's a big stop. One, two. Thank you.
I knew like I could have met you from Super Dumpling.
I must admit, it took me about 2 or 3 of the 60 meetings to reconnect. I'm pretty rubbish.
Check plans.
How you
Check plans. Other questions which I had.
Should I was being finalized everything by now? Yeah.
So. Processes, how is it?
Well, so. Spent it. I haven't really seen that. Yeah, I haven't really seen it.
Like, what's this?
Regulation taken. David's chance. And then. That's it, next door. Concrete, it's exactly. How does it compare to what price is it? So it's just that whole thing. It's not very good on science, which is my favorite. Yeah, I think that's right. And things, yeah. You can always find it.
But I was just. So,
Yes, we do know Christmas. You're coming. But yeah, that's fine.
Transportation. So they don't have to put it somebody. That's really good. Enjoyed that. Thank you. And where we? Yeah. So most of the Bible. I think we yeah.
The following, the people.
Right.
Okay, it should be in your coach lunch. Update some things and it's very yeah. Yeah. Really? Yeah. You I guess you are something very good presentation. Sorry, thank you guys for Yeah, you guys put the case recording. Yeah. It's more of I got some this actually. I'm from Solent. So I passed out in 2016. It's a master's in 2018. Yes. But then I just changed to the thing now. So I'm working like a man. Link of all. So. When I was 20 years, I got like 4-5. And I got more flexibility. Okay, to buy a one of the so I get my experience. This thought. If they started right now, they are recommending to start applying for graduate session. There are a lot of like already how active everyone and so. If you're all out there, back with like cynical kind of comments about it in the expense of it, like. Benefits it or something.
I think you're connected.
Okay, yeah.
It holds space in the
Because I usually
remember just being blown away by that.
So I usually
Say this. Yeah, like when it's going to say.
If I would apply right now.
Yeah.
They close by December. For bigger firms. But the opposite ones are age that I used to they graduate. I work as a right now, and somebody's working in June, July.
it's like selling certificates, you that in the IGP software. So like,
I think they open it now.
and in the real information is happening.
But
Yeah, okay. They're just thinking to check this, but then what's like
they won't be in
innovation.
but this is the time.
Like, so that's the really think about it. I've seen that once in India, there was something
Okay.
I didn't really work on, but I ended up going to swing out the church. Okay. Yeah, yes. Yes.
Because the intermediate role, you have to apply only because now we apply they will decline. Like in the guarantee with next year. So start applying towards the end of your. But graduate rules it usually takes some time to apply.
I think it was about 60K. So the
Which times can go to learn more about 30% stuff.
They're offering the kind of folks now, actually, yeah. So graduate now, the main thing, people are the targets. So if you don't catch those. Get the master there and the process.
And then use that process of the direct starting out there, stored in students. So like, and then he took volcanic rock. So many, the volcanic rock, there's that volcanic rock. They want and about the steam level. So you can set it. So nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. They take the air out of that rock stone and it's kind of increased without doing all the civil work. But the legacy of that positive is going to be increased. There is like evidence in this in one set that's it, case will rebound. You can buy it. That's why on these do I feel it. So yeah, again, that's on the basis of the regulation. You saw what we're on. What's something. Visualize on here. You know, it's kind of like hard copies. Is that? So in the basically so it was just another example where it is aligned with the rest of this. That for us to do something that will be just okay. Let's see what probably if you're doing it this time.
Yeah, I use this those standard technology for this radiant pipe design stuff. Yes, because I work quite a lot on gradient and design. Use this thermal mass concept